I want to welcome you to this important youth forum. This forum is intended to provide us with the experience and perspectives of young people across Canada and the Caribbean, while we create an opportunity for collective dialogue and exchange and action. This is framed as a strategic initiative to drive regional and international collaboration and to co-produce youth-led recommendations to drive gender-responsive educational reform. Gender differences in education performance is at the bedrock of this dialogue. Differences in participation, completion, performance levels, whether that is in completion or attainment. The differential outcomes are well known and well established. School dropouts and subjective and career choices are part of this youth forum discussion. Driven but not limited. And so we'll go right into our presentations. We have three presenters who will share with us their perspectives on the topic. And then we have a number of student participants, three we're privileged to have in person, and we have a number of others who are online. And so I will go right ahead and introduce the presenters, and then we will then continue with the students participants. Dr. Beverly Jean Daniel is from Toronto Metropolitan University. Professor Carl James, York University, and Dr. Lisa Edwards, University of Guyana. They will present in that order, and their bios, very impressive bios, are available for you in the program. Thank you very much for being here. Here we go.
Good evening, everyone. I know it's been a long day, and so the 10 of you who stuck around, thank you. All right. five of whom are my friends. So, I really wanted to sort of ground the conversations in terms of saying that my research, I argue, spans pre-K to PhD, right? That's the student populations that I've been looking at. So I've done research that looks at the experiences of Black children, early childhood education environments, and the types of racialized experiences that they have there and how that then impacts their educational trajectory. I've also done research looking at students from grades 7 to 12, and as well the post-secondary landscape from college to PhD completion, right? So what I really was trying to do is to map an educational trajectory that would be promotive of academic success amongst Black students. I was also privileged to be able to collect some data in Kenya, right? Because I wanted to do sort of a comparative analysis of the data sets to see, well, are there unique aspects of Black students' experiences within predominantly Black spaces versus predominantly white spaces that impacts how they navigate and understand their educational experiences? Mentorship emerged as a really significant aspect of what the young people were asking for. And, and maybe the young people on the panel may say something different. But what they were saying was that they really wanted mentorship to move beyond just advising, right? Don't just come, sit, and I tell you, do this and do that. They really wanted mentorship to emerge in different contexts in different ways. So what I mean by that is depending on where they were at in their life journeys, they were very clear that they needed different types of mentorship. But I also argue that even the terminology around mentorship, we may need to reconceptualize it because in some ways it's a bit of a foreign term for those of us who are not, sort of the European stock per se, right? So we may have to think about what words can you use to allow for our young people to feel that they can come to us and have conversations with us to help navigate their careers and their lives. And they use the term architect, that a mentorship needs to be an architect, someone who helps them to build their life plan. It wasn't just try this or try that. It was really someone who was there to walk them through that journey. The other thing that both parties talked about was the importance of the mentor being able to help them to develop what I have been framing as a positive Black racial identity, which I articulate a difference between them having a Black identity, which tends to sort of replicate the stereotypical patterns of what society says it means to be Black, versus the ones who had developed a positive Black racial identity, whereby they had developed a really holistic sense of who they are. So they weren't necessarily getting sucked into the fads and the trends, that they were grounded in their history, they were grounded in their identity, and they were able to bring that into the spaces that they entered. So that positive Black racial identity really seemed to be emerging as a protective factor, both with the populations within the Canadian context and within the Kenyan context, even though their entry point wasn't race. It was ethnic grouping, right? So if they had a positive sense of the ethnic affiliation, that was also important in terms of how they navigated that space. I would argue that when we look at the racial dynamics in the Caribbean, in as much as we like to say that race is not that big of a deal, I think if we were really honest, we would realize that power is heavily racialized within the Caribbean context, right? And particularly when we factor in that we are still in colonial structured spaces, right? So for us not to look at the experiences specifically of Black youth and Black males as well, I think we're doing a disservice, and we're not preparing ourselves for what is potentially coming that we're seeing in the Americas, right? That until we're able to really put specific and intentional practices in place, then we run the risk of losing some of our youth. And we know that education is really foundational, not just to the survival of the individual, the family, and the community, but it is foundational to the survival and the human capital of the system. So if we here in, let's say Trinidad, if we are not upskilling our young Black males, what is that doing for us as a society, right? It might benefit some people in the short term, but on a structural and societal level, we're seeing significant challenges with that. So there were sort of four main areas of mentorship that the young people talked about: cultural stewardship, right? So helping them to understand who they are, relational accompanier. A lot of our young people are dealing with emotional challenges, mental health challenges that's not being addressed. And what they were saying is that the mentor can become someone, if they have a close enough relationship, that they can go to and say, I'm having a hard time. And that mentor might be able to provide them with some supports and also to point them in the right direction. They also talked about needing a navigational strategist, right? And that person actually, interestingly enough, didn't necessarily have to be racially matched. It was just somebody who could tell them where the resources are, where the scholarships are, which schools to apply for. And the fourth one was a professional exemplar, someone who had navigated the system and could tell them, this is what it feels like to be a Black person in these spaces. Here are some of the strategies that I have learned along the way that has helped me. But the other thing that I really wanted to highlight, and I'm guessing my time is almost up, is there was a clear difference between the males and the females, right? And typically when we structure mentorship programs, we don't factor in these differences. So what's emerging from my data is that for females, their site of relation and their site of information is the family first. Peer group is second. And societal messages third. For the males, it was the opposite. It was societal messages first, peer group second, and family third, right? So when we're saying that, the family should and the family should, and, it's because the family isn't doing this and the family isn't doing that, that's not what's showing up in the male data, right? So when society says, if you're a Black male, you're supposed to be a basketball player, you're supposed to be a rapper, you're supposed to do all of these things, those are the things that are influencing the males more. Um, and I was listening to someone talk about the two effects, the Huxtable family effect, right? When the Cosby Show was on, and what they saw in the US was a significant increase in the number of Black students who were completing high school and going on to college. The other effect was, I'm trying to remember the name of the rapper, but it was basically connected to rap music. And with the Huxtable effect, what they saw was approximately 84% of Black kids completed high school. When rap music kicked in, what they saw was that there was now a 44% completion. So almost half, right, of the males, especially, um, did not complete. And I think what that does is sort of reinforces what I'm seeing in my research. So if we're expecting and wanting to see Black males succeeding, it is so important for us to ensure that what they're exposed to on a structural and a societal level, those messages are also changing, right? But I also want us to be careful about not losing the females, because we tend to say Black women are doing better. But when you actually start speaking to them and they talk about the drama and the trauma of having these expectations. And I will end on a very depressing note, but you can ask me about it later on. There's research in the US that is now showing that suicide rates amongst Black youth and young adults is now one of the highest rates of all populations. Black children between the ages of 6 to 12 are twice as likely to die by suicide than white children. And the 15 to 17 age group, they've had the highest increase. So in some cases, you're seeing 144% increase in suicides amongst Black youth, right? And a lot of it is coming from the females are saying, I can't do this anymore. The males are saying, there's no future for us. But the key factor that's cutting through all of it, particularly within the North American context, is the impact that racism is having, right? And I don't think we could also minimize the impact of racism within the Caribbean context as well, right? So, and I will stop there.
Thank you. We'll hold our questions for the end. Is Professor James on? Okay.
Yes, I am.
Can we have him?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you. Hi, Professor Daniels. Thanks very much for having me and for engaging me in this conversation. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Sorry I could not have attended in person, something else, but I am very much listening and very interested in this topic. I'm going to also look very closely at the Canadian context. And in doing so, I will pick up on some of the things that Dr. Daniels said. And I have a paper that I was going to read, but since that Professor Daniels set the stage, I'll try to talk it. uh, the title I gave my paper was Why Are the Third Plus Generation Black Students Not Academically Achieving Like Their First and Second Generation Peers? And I'm looking here at the Canadian context, and I think it's something to think about when we think of immigration and who are the Canadian students. Dr. Daniel talked about the students generally, and she talked, but I also want to do some work in disaggregating the group and see how we can engage our conversation in particular ways. In the Times Magazine in the US on June 1st, 2022, there was an article that said why the children of immigrants are the ones getting ahead in the US. And the authors had done a study, and they talked about it used to be given that each American generation would do better than the last, but social mobility has been showing over time that they made the point that the dream that many immigrants to America came into America with are not being realized. Just a sec. So, but what they found in their work is that the 3 points that the authors tried to show. The first takeaway from children of immigrants that they achieve more upward social mobility than the children of US born fathers. And they went on to say that the second thing was that children of parents from very poor countries, and one of the countries that they named was Nigeria and Laos, and these children outperform US born children. That was that was an article in the Times in 2022. In 2024, another article appeared in the New York Times this time, and the author was also making the point that, again, the author wrote, "Why so many children of immigrants rise to the top?" And he talked about how immigrants and their children are assimilated into the United States, and that immigrants are good at doing something difficult, like leaving behind relatives and friends and the familiarity of home to go for search for better and more prosperous things. So that's what these articles from the U.S. have been saying with regard to 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 young people coming to the U.S. And then in some work looking at the Organization for Economic Cooperation in Development Countries, that the research shows that children of immigrant parents tend to be more likely to enter university, that in many cases today's universities and colleges in OEDC countries, namely the US, England, Canada, etc., children of those immigrants tend to be the ones in post-secondary institutions. So what's the Canadian situation? I said that because I gave those start in order to show that there is some concern about who are doing well and who are not doing well, and what role does immigration play in this regard? Statistics can mention, and I'm quoting, the children of immigrants are generally more likely than their counterparts from the third plus generation to go into post-secondary studies. So children then, in the Canadian context, most of the students that we're encountering tend to be first generation young people in the Canadian context who are doing well in education. And when we look at that, then we have to say, but it's not just these young people basically going. We have to see what role did the immigration policies and in immigration program play in who comes into Canada at particular times, and where are and how are the third generation and who are the third generation Black students that we're talking about. Many of these third generation Black students in the Canadian schooling system tend to be of Caribbean background. Many of the first generation and second generation tend to be those who are coming more recently, and most who are coming in more recently, they tend to be of African background. So when we're going to address these issues with the students and how they're doing, paying attention to gender is one thing, but we also have to pay attention to the generational situation, because the generational situation is saying to us that if you're first and second generation, you're more likely to be more going to university, more likely to be more successful, and those who might be third generation. And insofar as most of the Caribbean students, of course, there are Caribbean students who come in and might be first generation, but our concern should be how disaggregating the data from not just gender, but generation. Because how are we going to address this third generation? What's happening to the third generation plus who have Caribbean, what has happened? I think it says something about the education system in Canadian context, where the longer you are in the Canadian system, the less likely you are to go into the education programs and so forth that Dr. Daniels is talking about. Hence, we have to see and start thinking about the education structures here framed in the colonial system and students and families who have been coming through that system are not getting an education that speaks to their needs, interests, and aspirations. And the students who are coming today of immigrant background have, while they come in with and some of them might go home back home. They have the relationship back home. Their parents will enable them and support them. Not that these third generation kids are not being supported, they are, but the education system. Remember, they're getting the education from grade one, and that education structuring them in a way that they might not see themselves in the curriculum, the curriculum might not be talking to them, or the longer they are having to address issues of racism, discrimination, being streamed into non-academic programs, then they're likely not to be able to do. We have to also think too about these parents, and the parents might not necessarily have the economic means. Again, we have to think of Black parents and how they are in the Canadian system with regard to uh, financial situation, educational situation, etc., etc. So hence, we need to start building, and I think there is some urgency, I would argue, to start paying attention to the diversity of the Black community, the diversity of Black students, and the idea that we need to have a different approach to Black students who might be first generation, second generation, and those who might be third generation. And hence the curriculum must seek to address these cultural differences, because ones who have gone through the system are going to have a different cultural reference than those who might have come in more recent times. Hence, the idea of when we talk of culturally responsive education and a culturally grounded, relevant education for Black students, we also have to pay attention to diversity of the Black students. I think I'll stay there, and then I can be ready for much more conversation as we try to unpack some of these things.
Okay. So in thinking through and preparing for this panel, one of the things I reflected on was my own research work, where I was interested in what does a feminist classroom look like? Because when we think of gender, oftentimes we kind of disaggregate with the sex, this male, female, and that is it. But it includes much more of the qualitative aspect that would intersect with categories of race, disability, and so on. So I teach a course at the University of Guyana on gender development, and almost every semester so far, I would have like about 100 or a little over 100 students. Most of those students are women, and most of them are coming from the international relations program. So when I was collecting my data to kind of gauge from them what their experience has been like in the classroom, you would find that for the women who responded, they were like, what they appreciated was the care or the follow-up or the engagement they have with their instructor. For the men in the classroom, they would say like, this course focused on too much on women. It's about women, y'all keep bashing the men too much. I don't know what's going on. But strangely, there are some of the male students as well who would say they kind of, begin to see gender, differently, and even how it is showing up in their everyday lives. And this led me to the point of the type of pedagogy that we are using when approaching on our classroom. And my co-presenter hinted at it when she talked about mentorship, and it kind of links to that point of the pedagogy of care, not just in What is the approach in, how we engage in students, like follow up or checking with them? And this becomes important in thinking through the post-COVID era, but also the global challenges that we are engaged in presently. We can't just engage students and just deliver content, but what other measures can we adopt in our classroom space? But also, how do we see our classroom? Is it just a point of delivering notes, or really to transgress and challenge some of these global systems that our current context is currently engaging? Now, if we were to consider the sex ratio throughout the Caribbean, we do have more of our young girls completing secondary and even tertiary education, but this does not automatically translate to them having well advanced economically and even socially. In our society, in the region, and in our respective society, you still have the challenge of gender bias. Again, my co-presenter would have hinted examples of this when she talked about, families and oftentimes women still having to carry that. In a study that one of our faculties did when they were tracking students who completed the same program and were out in the field of work, what they found was that majority of the female students were more so assigned to office jobs, whereas the men, they were more out in the field, and that limits the experience that students can have in their respective workspaces. But also taking account these things has an effect when we're looking at outcomes. If is it that we're going to have majority of our girls and women advancing, and our men and boys are still taking the gender socialization that their focus should be on earning money and providing from their family, and that education may not have a higher emphasis, that creates a very steep disparity in how men and women engage each other. So if we're looking at the higher rates of violence that continue to exist within our region, it is also connected to how our Caribbean young men and women are engaging with our education systems. We also could give consideration to the pedagogy of solidarity for the previous panel that we're touching on decolonialized education. When we're talking about, Black people's challenges, Brown people's challenges, these are all challenges that we can connect on. But how are we integrating it, that sort of social consciousness within our education system, whether it be it in higher education or even at the secondary level as well, remains a point to kind of interrogate further in terms of we're not just training the next generation in terms of being expert in their respective field, but having a certain social consciousness that may be very much needed and necessary in how the region moves forward. I think I'm going to end there and hand it over to the young people now.
I want to thank our presenters, and yes, we want to hear from our young people. The 2025 CARICOM UNICEF report did indicate one specific percentage that is interesting to me. 58% of the respondents felt a lack of optimism about the future. And here we are trying to deal with the issue of securing Canada Caribbean futures, repositioning traditional and emerging challenges within the context of the individuals who are not only our future, but our current. And we are excited that we have Nikita, Lachelle, and Shanique with us here today from UE. And we have a number of others online. I'll check in with them in a little while. But let's start with our students who are here in the audience with us. Nikita?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And it's a pleasure and an honor to participate in this important discussion on gender dynamics. So my perspective would come from an observation that I recently made. Recently, I attended my niece's Form 3 subject selection meeting, and this would have been the third one that I would have attended within the past decade. Yes, I know I don't look that old. what I would have observed is that multiple speakers explicitly emphasized that no subject was inherently male or female. And this was something that was new to me. They made it clear that all students are free to choose based on their interest and ability, not their gender. The speakers stressed that girls could select CVQ electrical and mechanical engineering technology, and boys could select humanities and pursue English literature and history. This may seem like a small shift in language, but to me, I believe it is very significant. As we all know that subject selection at the CSEC level influences educational and career pathways. And when we look at tertiary data, we see gendered concentration still occurring. For instance, at the UE St. Augustine campus, when you look at the male to female ratio for both 2022 and 2023, and the 2023-2024 academic year, you would see that there's a 2-to-1 ratio from male to female for engineering and a 1-to-3 ratio for humanities and education. Again, this suggests that gendered patterns of participation continues across educational levels. And my colleagues would have also touched on it when we talk about gender bias in language and at the structural and systemic level. So a language shift of gender bias in choice of subject or discipline can positively impact gender assumptions about who belong in certain fields and expand on what young people believe as or perceive themselves possible. My recommendation is that intentional gender-inclusive messaging should not be occasional or exceptional. It should be standard practice across all schools. It should be something that is within the system, that is structural. When we normalize diverse subject choice early, we widen participation and ultimately we tend to influence positive outcomes. I thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lachelle Gopal. I am a psychology PhD candidate within the University of the West Indies. For me, I wanted to touch on things that I would change about gender stereotypes in education in Trinidad and Tobago. I feel like there's an achievement emphasis, and we push our children very quietly to place more on what they can achieve versus what they are naturally inclined to do. As previously mentioned, girls really do outperform the boys within all aspects from CSEC to CAPE to tertiary education. And that mindset keeps on going. Even within the UE population, more than half of us are females. We are always here on campus. You see it, it's very prevalent. I've worked in the child guidance clinics and I've seen for the boys, they're outperforming the girls in terms of behavioral challenges, lack of access to mental health, they have higher school suspension. So I feel like in those aspects, having mentorship, having revamping of curriculum can help support both genders, male and females. Because within the community, culture does shape the confidence levels, what they feel that they can get into, what they are able to achieve. And it's not really about their ability, but how we're conditioning them based on what the adults are putting out into the society. So if nurses are only females, then that's where they're going to gear towards. So if we box the kids in early, then that's going to shrink them and shrink where they're going to in the future. So from my perspective, I would definitely have cultural sensitivity training, gender bias training for our educators, creating safer spaces for emotional literacy from young, and definitely engaging leadership and pushing that STEM and other programs across the board, whether it's for males or females. Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shanique Joseph. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus in the field of psychology. One issue that I have observed, well, I must say that I like how we're flowing into each other's points. So one thing that I've observed, particularly, it's within relation to my area of research interests. I'm particularly interested in the care sector, right? And one area what I've seen in terms of how we've materialized or the start of gender imbalance, it happens much earlier, right? As some of my colleagues have stated.
when I've looked at the classes that I've sat in or that I've taught, either it be social work, child and youth studies, psychology, it's predominantly female students. And the males tend to gravitate towards engineering, law, IT, physics, and so on, and what we particularly socialize as the higher status jobs, which Lucia would have just shared. What I do see, and I find very interesting, even within the female-dominated fields, where we do have men entering in those fields, they elevate quite quickly, as opposed to the female students or female workers. And to compound the issue, it's the lack of gender disaggregated data. Luchelle would have mentioned some of the enrollment data, but there's a lack of retention data. There's a lack of leadership pathways, whether it's gender, in terms of it being gender disaggregated. And in that light, my recommendation would be to have more diversified recruitment, and also to have more gender disaggregated data to focus on building a pathway that is more inclusive to our youth.
Thank you, ladies. I think we have a few students online also, so I'll check in. Lorenzo from Jamaica. Okay.
Good afternoon. Good evening, everyone. So my name is Lorenzo Gunter, and I am a graduate student of Northern Caribbean University. And I'm currently studying my master's in biology with an emphasis in molecular biology. Now, working as a lab tech in chemistry and biochemistry labs at NCU, classrooms are usually filled with more female students than male students, roughly around 70%, and at the highest, it's around maybe 95% that I'm seeing where females outnumber males. Now, while this seems positive and it seems positive on the female side, it also creates isolation for the minority males who withdraw or underperform due to lack of peer support and mirroring national trends where men lag in graduation rates and despite equal access. Now, this imbalance stifles diversities and discussion on protocols or experiments limiting innovative problem solving. Now, my key recommendation for this is to launch target male retention programs like peer mentoring circles and flexible lab schedule to accommodate working studying males, because a lot of males, especially in Jamaica, they have to work and study because they don't really want to take student loan. So yes, that's my recommendation for this problem. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Lorenzo. And next we go to Harriet Foster, who's also from Jamaica. Okay, she's still muted. Is it that we need to unmute her? Okay. Checking to see who else is here. Angelique from Canada. I think you're on the list.
Sorry about that, MC. Mrs. Foster's mic isn't working currently. I'm not sure what's the problem, so she'll be using my device because we're in the same. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Harriet Foster, and I'm a graduate student from Northern Caribbean University, and my major is science education. Now, I have been working in the secondary education system for a number of years, and what I have observed is that our boys are not as motivated to receive formal education as the girls. I have noticed that sometimes some of the boys at the secondary level are unable to read, and we have to make intervention to teach them to read. So my recommendation is that we have a differentiated curriculum where the learning environment for boys is adjusted so that they can do more practical subjects. And I would also encourage us to train and to encourage more male teachers to enter the education system to motivate the boys from kindergarten straight up to the university level. And also to ensure that the teachers are sufficiently trained to help the boys who are unable to read so that they can benefit from the educational system, especially from ages 12 to 18. I would like to see more teachers geared to teach reading in the content areas so to motivate the boys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harriet. Thank you very much. I think we have one person from Canada that is on the list according to who I can see online.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. My name is Angelique. I am from Canada. I'm currently in my first year of law school here. As I reflected on a lot of the discussions that we've had here, and even when I was thinking about what is something of my experiences and what would I recommend, I thought back to the point of when we talk about women and being not outspoken or being traditionally in those fields of like nursing and those kind of caregiving roles, it really showcases that cultural aspect and traditional aspect that we are meant to be in specifically that. I remember when I said that I wanted to go to law school, the first things were, are you sure that's what you wanted to do? Is this something that you should be doing? And I was often pushed into roles of sciences or even nursing and doctor, those traditional roles. And now that I'm here in this point, I think back to also the things that were said. Oh, you shouldn't be so outspoken, or you shouldn't think about the world in that way, or you should be very much constrained to like being this quiet person who can't achieve more in terms of like the legal fields and things like that. And I think one thing that I would recommend is not just about policy changes, but also shifting a bit of the culture we live in, where it creates women or pushes young girls into this rhetoric of keeping them in these specific roles rather than encouraging their ambitions if this is something that they want to do, to be outspoken, to fight for what they believe in, to do those things and step outside of those roles is by creating those safe spaces where they're able to have these discussions and also having their parents have these discussions with them that it's normalized.
Thank you very much. I think that's the end of our presentations. We have a few minutes where we can engage in a dialogue. The aim of this forum is to arrive at a place where we can make some recommendations about some actions that can be taken within the context of the gender disparities that we find in education. We've talked about some of these, and I think we'll take a few minutes just to do that. Just at USC, just as a point of departure, our graduation rate, at every graduation, we graduate just about 12% of the class happens to be males. So we're looking for discussion that then lead to some policy changes within the context of our two economies. All right, so we have the experts And we have the student experts and questions. We'll take a few minutes to do that now. I see a hand. Is there a mic there, or should I use this one? Okay, thank you. I know.
Thank you very much for the presentations. I feel like there's an elephant in the room. I don't know if I have a recommendation, but I certainly want to pat the elephant in the room, which is education over the years. I would say post 1982 has become feminized. Education is seen as a female endeavor. And I don't know how we're going to change that, but I think it's important given what Dr. Edwards was talking about in terms of the widening gender divide in the Caribbean and men's expectations and women's expectations. I feel like if we make any policy without admitting that that is what we're really trying to fix, it probably is going to fall short of what we're trying to fix. So where is gender on the regional policy agenda? Because I'm in Barbados, it certainly is not there. All the men in Barbados think that all the women are men haters. We've taken their jobs, we're taking over the government, blah, blah, blah. And they don't just say it, they believe it. So where is gender in the regional policy agenda? One conversation is happening in the university, another is happening politically and societally. And gender, yeah, is it a good word, a bad word? I think all of these are things we have to reflect on if we're really going to come to any recommendations that are going to work.
Well, thank you very much. Any one of the panelists want to respond? You want to
I think there are multiple elephants in the room. I think first and foremost, we continue to breastfeed our children on colonial educational narratives. And I think until we can take the mass out of the house, we're going to keep replicating exclusionary practices. And one of the things I say to people is I draw a distinction between schooling and education. Those of us who continue to be subjected to colonial narratives, we're being schooled, and we're being schooled into failure. We're not being educated. Education is a holistic process that centers the individual, the people, the culture, and our culture and histories are not being centered. So for me, I've made the argument that the system of schooling actually works really, really well. It was designed for people to fail, and people are failing, and we're going, oh my gosh, this is a shock. Well, no, this is not a shock. This is what it was designed for. So I think until we begin to sort of reclaim these systems of education, until our children can see themselves holistically represented, right? So for example, one of the things I say to people is, don't ask me to come and do anything for Black History Month. I'm not coming. Or if I come, let me tell you my version, right? And my version of Black History Month in North America is, my God, what people are willing to do for money, right? What Europeans have been willing to do to erase, debase. So I think we have to rethink the messages. But I also think what it does is that it reinforces what I'm seeing in my research, that as long as males continue to be told that education is feminized, you don't have a place here, we don't need you, right? And I don't think we can separate that from the fact that historically, the Black male has been intentionally removed from the family, from the society. And if you want to dismantle a people, you take their males, right? Because you know the females will step up because we don't have a choice. So I think until we really start looking at the fact that there's an intentionality in terms of the removal, the elimination of the Black male, which will then result in elimination of us as a people, until we start having those conversations, doesn't matter how many elephants we want to pet, right? I think that's foundationally where we have to start.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Could I add to that? I wonder if education has been feminized, or we have to start thinking of patriarchy in a different way than we have been thinking about patriarchy. Because increasingly, yes, we see more and more females entering post-secondary education. Yes, more and more females graduating. Yes, but at the same time, has really the system changed to be more responsive to, culturally responsive to the issues related to women? I'm not sure it has. I think patriarchy is still very much alive and well. So, but we're not approaching it in a way to at least address the new ways in which women might be disadvantaged in the same we might see it as advantaging, but in the same way, it's been disadvantages to women. And yes, that's not to underestimate the disadvantages of males, of course. But we have to see how the disadvantage of male versus the disadvantage of female. So I think one of the things I think about when I think about is the use of in the schools of adultification and the way in which males have been adultified and women have been adultified. And we need to pay attention to how these things are working out within the system in order to address how patriarchy is really alive and well.
Thank you, Professor James. Yes, go ahead, Doctor.
Yeah, I'll try to make it brief as possible. I just want to say, like, I have a knack on honing in on certain expression, and when we say an area is feminized, is often framed as being problematic, not just in education, but like in poverty or even looking at migration. And I'm not saying that's where you're coming from, because if we look at the educational space historically, it was men who occupied and dominated that space, but it wasn't framed in that way. This is just my knack, right? But following up on my co-presenter, patriarchy is also very much harmful to men, especially Black and brown men. And as the student presenters very much mentioned throughout their presentation, is also looking at culture. So we need to also challenge, actively and intentionally challenge culture in how we are engaging our men and young boys when it comes to education. Because at the end of the day, they will benefit if they are very intentional in taking up, you know, educational spaces. Right, thank you.
Because
Yes,
the system
I see.
remains patriarchal.
I'm sorry I didn't get that, Professor James.
No, just simply the system remains patriarchal.
Okay, thank you. I see a hand there, one there, help me. And there's a third one. Okay, so let's do 1, 2, 3. Did I miss any? Okay. Or let's take number 3, and then we'll get the mic to number 2. Sure.
Two of the previous speakers hit exactly on the points I wanted to add to the elephant. And I don't think in the Caribbean we have a very nuanced discussion about what patriarchy means and what it means for both men and women. And to the last point, yes, in fact, it is detrimental, not just to women, but to men. And so we have to acknowledge that and work from there, not just, women aren't the enemy. Patriarchy is the enemy. Let's dismantle that. Looking again at the education system though, and again, this ties back into patriarchy, because women's labor is not valued as men's labor, fields that are dominated by women aren't remunerated as well as fields that are dominated by men, which has now resulted in, as a mother, I have never seen a male provider in an ECCE setting. My children who are in primary school, they probably have 30 teachers. If they have 3 male teachers, that's a lot. So these boys, in their very formative years, early in their cognitive development, do not have role models as their parents would have had before them. Because I know for my parents, both are educators. When they would have been educators, it would not have been this lopsided ratio of men to women providers in education. And I think recognizing the impact of patriarchy on our education system and the providers therein also needs to be acknowledged, and the link to that to labor, which again ties back into what fields our boys and our men are now attracted to. And a point was made earlier about men, our boys and men going into being providers as opposed to pursuing education. But the reality is our women are now outpacing some of our men in terms of their earning. And how is that now impacting their relations and their families in terms of the expectations that we have and dismantling all of that related to toxic masculinity, again, going back to patriarchy. So I think we really, really need to have a much more nuanced and open discussion about what that means for Caribbean societies as distinct from other societies.
Thank you very much. Do I have someone to respond, or we can move on?
Wait.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Hi, everyone. So the question that I have, or the comment I want to make, as a data scientist, I normally look at, features in the data and so forth. And one of the things that, and for all of those who deal with data here, you would know that if you overfit a model, right, it will give you probably near 100% accuracy. But then that is injected result, right? And that's not a reflection of real reality, right? And what does overfitting mean? That you try to make it too perfect. So the question that I have we overfitted the model or have we overcompensated? So there was the time when women were lacking in many spheres of society, right? And then today now, have we, in many of those areas, they have prevailed, and that's perfectly good. But have we overfitted to the point now that we now make the male now become the gender that is at risk? And we've overcompensated, and we went from one extreme to the other without finding that sweet spot in the middle.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you. Very interesting statistical observation there.
I think my response to that sort of underscores a concern that I have been asking my students to think about for a long time now. Do we as societies tend to overcorrect? And then when we overcorrect, we now create other problems, right? So one of the things that every Christmas, we can't say Christmas now, we have to say happy holidays. And no, I'm talking about in Canada. So I'm just, because it becomes a whole drama around, and it's like, okay, so I can say this and this and this, but I can't say that, right? And one of the concerns that I have had for a long time is what is going to be the impact on our males if we don't stop to think about what this notion of inclusion means, right? So we need to include females. Yes, absolutely. I am female. I'm the mother of 3 males and 1. I need to see everybody included. But as the lady at the back said, right? A lot of our boys don't see a male teacher ever, right? So do we need to have some intentionality in terms of finding a balance so that when and I mean, it's the same thing we said in terms of race, right? We needed to see more representation of Black teachers in the classrooms as well, because we know that makes a difference. We know that Black children tend to do better with Black teachers. So if we know that males do better with males and females do better with females and Blacks do better, right? If we know that, why aren't we doing some of that work? And I would also say really quickly in that the program that I implemented at the post-secondary level, specifically for Black students in Canada, we were seeing 100% retention rate, right? And our Black students, male, female, and all the genders in between, right? They were outpacing the other students. So it's not that Black boys can't learn, right? So let's be very clear. Being Black is not a risk factor. Society structures risk for Black people differently than it does for the population. So yes, I think we need to do some intentionality of bringing all bodies to the table.
Thank you. Okay. All right. I think we have exhausted the questions. Yeah. Okay. Where is that? Oh, there you go. This is an important one. Yeah.
So something that I really am not understanding is why are we tipping the scale too far on one side? Because for me, like, I think that people forgot to realize is that no one is really less capable at jobs. Like, we can do anything that we want to do. And for me, I don't think that overcompensation is necessarily a bad thing. You just need to balance it out for the other side. Um, the fact that education now is more like shifted towards women and females, I feel like it's balancing out for like previous years. Men were like expected to go to college, and women were just like not expected to, you know. So what I just really think is that opportunity should be open to both genders, because teachers can be male and female. Like, there was never really a rule based on the job you could have had because of your gender. And we need to stop acting like, you know, male teachers is something that is should be like not very often. Like, it should be the norm along with female teachers, you know?
Mhm.
Men can be nurses too, not just top level doctors. Doctors can and are women, and they should be. Um, so yeah, what we need to do instead of like overcompensating on both sides is, when the scale is tipping on one side, you just need to compensate on the other side. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Pretty sure that kid is not in college. Yeah, pretty sure. All right. Or it could be, or it should have been. Well, let me say it this way: the kid should have been a professor in a college somewhere. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Did I get everyone? Okay, thank you. You were rooting for that young man. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to turn to the students. If the students have a final word, and we'll be on time, but we want to be mindful of our students.
I just wanted to make a quick comment in response to the young man, and I think excellent job. But and even the other gentleman raised it in terms of the tipping to the scale. But what Dr. Daniel would have noted in her study is the structural implication of it, which is language. I think when it comes to the compensation, not to say yes or no, we did overcompensate to one side, but I think when it comes to advocating for females, what we actually saw was a structural shift. We actually saw women advocating structurally and systemically for themselves, for us to enter the workplace, for us to pursue education, which wasn't the case back then. So I think now it really does tie back into that structural shift as it relates to language, where we now not only advocate for women to enter the workplace or women to pursue particular education or a particular discipline, but men advocating for themselves as well to pursue education across disciplines, to pursue occupation across disciplines. And it really stems from that structural, systemic aspect. That's what I wanted to comment on.
Very good. Very good. Thank you very much. Do we have a comment? Are you good? All right. Let me check online. Any of our presenter, professor, or any of the students? No more. Oh, somebody said the
Yeah,
same.
cool,
No
cool.
more.
I just want to say.
Let me. Oh, Professor James, I
Yeah,
think
no, I was
there's no
just going
more.
to say
Somebody
one
said,
important. Yeah.
one quick second. One quick second. Go, Doc James.
No, no, just simply saying one important thing that we can't say is how the structures and systems have been operating over the years and continue to operate. And so we could have to say, how is it the culture in which we live and maintaining a system and maintaining who gets into particular kinds of jobs, you know? So I keep thinking, as you were talking, what would it look like if we start seeing more men trying to go into early childhood education? Would we encourage that? And would we, and it's a space for that. And so therefore we have to think of our role in moving the culture towards being much more inclusive of women and men at all levels and in all areas.
I want to thank all the panelists. Put their hands together for the panelists.
Chair, just one quick point, Chair, please.
Okay.
I just wanted to make one quick thing, because we kind of ended where we were focused on the education system. Yes, we are outperforming in the education system, but let us not forget that that is not yet reflected in the workforce in terms of women's participation, especially at the highest level. So while, yes, we have made strides in the education system, and there may be some off balancing happening at the moment, there's still a lot of work to be done. And it ties back to the patriarchy. And it ties back to your point, Dr. James, about what do we value as a society and how do we compensate people for their labor.
Yes.
This is evidence. I think I'm done. I'm done. When I'm done, then you can continue. This is evidence that this conversation must continue. And we appreciate your participation, but they're telling me I need to stop, so I will stop. And then I'm sorry, sir. I'm very sorry.
Just one, and what I wanted to say is probably one. I don't have the data, so that I can't definitively say, but at least in the situation of Trinidad and Tobago, that statement that was just made is possibly untrue. Because in Trinidad, we now have women sitting in the 2 highest offices of the land. Out of the three highest that there are only 2 out of 3, right?
Okay, you started something that we won't be able to finish now. So let's just leave it alone. Yeah.
If you try to fight for masculinity in today's society, it's seen as being toxic. Because it's a feminist,
This panel is officially closed. This